first question I always ask is, would you mind sharing your journey to your faith in Christ?
Absolutely. Yeah. Love to share that story. It's starts with my wife. So her and I were married, had been married about 6 months, and I was born and raised Catholic. So it was very, very much religion for me. My vision of God was he was a judge sitting up on the bench, waiting to bang the gavel every time I screwed up, and he was banging it a lot. And so I always went to church every Sunday, but it was a check the box kind of thing. It wasn't a relationship. And I was pretty legalistic in that, to the point that my wife was going through catechism classes to join the Catholic Church. We've been married about 6 months, and we got moved. So we were living in Oklahoma City. We got moved to San Antonio. We move on a Saturday, and on Sunday morning, we wake up, and I said, "Hey, let's go to church." And she said, "Go to church? We just moved. I'm exhausted. Like, are you out of your mind?" And so after we'll call it a discussion about that, we didn't go. And for me, that was the first time I could ever remember in my life not going to church electively, like choosing not to go. I'd been sick and things like that, but choosing not to go. So, and I was 24 years old at the time. So the next week rolls around after I had suffered through a week of being sure the earth was going to, open up and swallow me for that decision. And we wake up the next Sunday morning, and I was prepared, and I said, "Hey, let's go to church." And she said, "I don't want to go to church. I don't get anything out of it." And I looked her in the eye, my beautiful bride, and I said, "You're not supposed to get anything out of church. You're just supposed to go." And she informed me that she didn't think that was right. And we had another discussion around it, but ended up not going. And but the discussion ended with her saying, "Hey, if I could get some recommendations for some other churches, would you be willing to check them out with me?" And I remember calculating in my head. Now, we had been married 6 months at that time. We've been married 25 years now. So I wouldn't be surprised by this now, but I was very surprised as I calculated in my head. We just moved to a city in which you don't know anyone, and you're going to ask people about church and get recommendations. Well, this should all blow over by next Sunday, so I agreed to it. I come home Monday from work, and she said, "Hey, I talked to 10 people between the grocery store and the gym, and 8 of them recommended this church. I think we should try it." So after I picked my jaw up off the floor, right, now I'm committed, and we ended up going and attending this church after a couple more weeks of negotiations, but ended up attending it. And when we go to this service, it was one of the lay pastors that was preaching, because the head pastor was gone that weekend. And he said, so he preached a sermon on how to lie, cheat, and steal. And he was up there with his guitar and his cowboy hat on. We're in San Antonio, Texas, right? So it was in the mode. And it was how to lie in his loving arms, cheat the devil of his due, and steal a minute every day. And he went on to give this whole sermon about how the Lord walks with him through his life at work, through his life as a husband, through his life as a father. And I knew when I heard that was what my heart had always longed for. All of my legalism was birthed out of that desire of wanting to be accepted and wanting to have that close relationship with God. And so from there, that started my journey. I wouldn't say that I was saved at that service, but was saved at that church through that journey of just coming to know Christ personally, that personal relationship, that desire that he has to know all of us individually.
Wow. So at that time, were you Catholic when you went to this church?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So then this was in a Catholic church?
No. As a matter of fact, a funny part of the story I left out was when we drove up there the first time, it was in a strip center. And so, man, this stained glass brick and mortar mindset, right. I'm like, well, what am I getting into?
I mean, Catholic churches are beautiful.
Absolutely. I'm like, what orange robe, right, am I going to be required to wear when I go inside a strip mall to church? Or, I mean, I didn't know what I was getting into, but so.
What type of church was it?
Non-denominational. So it's a church called Community Bible Church in San Antonio, Texas. And I actually, by coincidence, happened to get on the phone with a guy that was referred to me about some accounting services. And he lived there, and we got talking. One thing led to another. And I said, "Hey, where do you go to church?" And he mentioned, "I go to Community Bible Church." So we were there when it was a startup. And he told me how many tens of thousands of members they have at that church now. But it's a mega church in San Antonio, 25 years later.
Wow. So as a Catholic, Were you? So for me personally, I had a stepfather when I was younger who was Catholic, and then once he came into our lives, we started going to Catholic church, and I just remember the kneeling up and down, up and down. I mean, you kind of get a workout. So then with that, that had to have felt so different for you.
Sure, it was a really different experience, right? And I think that's the beauty of God's creativity. Mm-hmm. I mean, I truly believe that God reaches people in very, very different ways. And it's real important in our faith that we allow him the margin to be the creative God that he is in order to do that. So for me, it was a very different experience for sure. But again, it just came down to that understanding of, in that environment, I gained the understanding of the freedom of relationship, right? That the Lord wanted, the personal relationship that he desires, rather than being caught up in what can I do, right, in order to impress him.
Sure. So the beginning of this was your wife.
Yes.
Going to a non-Catholic church.
Yeah.
Wow.
For sure. So we were both saved. We were both saved in that church.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So how was her experience, though, going from Catholicism to now a maybe Protestant church?
Yeah. So for her, I think if she were here, she would say she never really made that Catholic faith her own because of her limited experience with it. And as she grew up, she was exposed to a lot of different churches and even some evangelical churches, to where that's really where she'd tell you her questioning of many things was birthed in that. So I think for her, it was a much easier transition.
Wow. So now let's get down to business.
Yeah.
Tell me what Bordner Home Improvement is all about.
Yeah, so we are home improvement contractors, specifically trade contractors. So we specialize in roofing, windows, baths, siding, and our typical jobs are 2 to 3 days on average. And the purpose of our company is relationships focused and results driven. Mm-hmm. So we prescribe to this idea that there are a lot of great people that do what we do. Mm-hmm. Some of them are great craftsmen and can deliver incredible results in the work that they do. But yet many times people are left wanting in the communication, and the experience is just rough. And when you're coming into the home, that's so intimate, right? And on the flip side of it, there's a lot of people that are great sales and marketers in our space that can tell you all the great things that they're going to do, but then there's no follow through, or maybe not that craftsmanship expertise on the back end of it. Mm-hmm. So we believe if we can deliver on both ends of that equation, that it gives us a seat at the table to be considered someone's contractor.
So what type of jobs are your guys' bread and butter, or even that you do the most of?
Yeah, so our roots are in roofing. So in 1987, my father-in-law founded the company, and it was 100% roofing. And so I think we would still say, that's really where our roots are at. That's largely what we're known for. Mm-hmm. It makes up about 50% of our business. But we've really worked hard over the past, especially 10 years, to develop, the other things that we do so that we can maintain a level of excellence no matter what we're doing.
So we've talked about this before. So you started at that business how many years ago?
I started in 2000, so 23 years ago.
And what were you doing before that?
I worked for Ernest and Julio Gallo selling wine.
Wow, that is such a great story. So you go from selling wine to now running a construction company.
Yeah.
I always just find it so just interesting of how God can just take anybody, regardless of their background, regardless of their expertise, and put them in a place and just have them be so successful in his way and according to his will. So talk about, what was that like, going from the wine business to the construction business?
I think the biggest challenge for me was I was probably the most nervous about not learning anymore, because in working for a big corporation, they were great about ongoing training, right? Always having us learning and growing. It was management development. They just did a phenomenal job of that. And I remember just having the reservation, thinking, man, am I going to join a smaller company like this and just stop learning? And, so now, 23 years later, that's a funny comment. But at that time, that was a real fear that I had within that. But it was a challenge. I mean, I went, from this management development program. It was a career that I pursued right out of college. Mm-hmm. Could see, a career path, almost, a lifelong career path. There were so many layers within that company. And then to go to, okay, you're here now and your opportunity is going to be what you make it. That was tough.
And what did you start out doing in the construction company?
So my father-in-law, when he hired me, we had a conversation around that. I was in sales, and the idea was that I would grow the sales department. We did a lot of new construction work for builders, and we wanted to grow into doing more work for homeowners. And so the idea was that I would eventually develop that. But he and his two brothers who owned the company, they were roofers by trade. And so they believed it would probably take about 5 years to learn all you needed to learn about roofing in order to be able to sell one. So I started out working on the roofing crews.
Literally out there.
Literally
with
out
the
there.
roofing crews.
Yeah.
So how long did you have to do that?
Well, the plan was 5 years, right? That was the plan. And after 90 days, I went into his office and I said, man, I've got good news and I got bad news. So the good news is you have a lot of great roofers in this company. The bad news, I'm not one of them.
Were you actually doing the roofing?
Yeah.
You were up there banging nails and actually installing the roof.
I was.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think that's such a great experience, though, that everybody should go through at least for 90 days or something. Because how can you sell something that you haven't really experienced yourself? And that's why even for us, all of our employees have to attend classes. It doesn't matter who you are, you have to pursue a black belt or beyond. How can you talk to a parent about our benefits if you haven't even experienced it yourself? So I think that's a great experience that you went through. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be a master roofer. So after you went through that experience and then you started selling, what was the next step?
Yeah, the next step from there was developing a sales team underneath me. So I had a sales team from my former career, and so when I came there, that's what I had the mindset to do. And after I sold for a year, I realized that's really where my heart was people development. I knew I would enjoy teaching 5 other people to do what I was doing sales-wise, so much more than just doing it myself. And so that was the next step. We developed a team from there and fine-tuned that hands-on learning experience a little bit so that it was more practical and made more sense. But that was the next step. So from there, and really the goal was, we were about 90% new construction when I started there. And so the goal with the business was to balance it out, have like a 50-50 book of business where we were working for homeowners as well as working for our builder customers. And we got to about 60% new construction, 40% homeowners in late 2007, early 2008, when there was a pretty significant recession. And so fortunately, we were thankful we had that part of our business to still work with and develop. But that was my father-in-law had great foresight and just recognizing that was a hedge that the business needed.
So before 2008, you guys were heavily into new construction?
Oh, yeah.
And then he just all of a sudden decided we need to get more into the current builds, improvements. What was the percentage change again?
So in 2000 was really when we started that journey. So in the 7 years leading up to 2008, we were able to take the percentage change from 90% new construction to about 60% new construction, 40%.
If he didn't do that, who knows where you guys would be now after 2008? Because I know of a lot of companies back in 2008 that didn't continue on. So I think that's amazing. So after you started running and building your sales team, what was the next step after that?
So after that, our business, we began to, at the same time that we were doing that, we were expanding into some other things that we were doing within our business as a whole. So from 2008 to 2019, I was the general manager of the business as we worked through the different changes, the different trades that we were going to be doing. And I go back to that story where I was worried about, would I learn anything or not? And I'll just say in that time, I feel like I got my PhD in business, although it was from the School of Hard Knocks, right?
Right.
I definitely learned and continue to be blessed to learn a lot.
So you went from sales to operations, really?
Yeah.
How did that go for you?
It was overall, it went good. I mean, there was still a lot that I didn't know, in the details of operations. But I think when you're leading people that know more than you do technically, it teaches you as a leader to be really humble and to ask good questions. And so I was really blessed within that. I had a great team of people that were willing to educate me and, share with me and teach me. And they put up with a lot of my growing pains, that they had to suffer through. And so it was a great experience. I mean, we've always been really blessed with just great people.
Yeah.
And, I kind of live by this axiom now that when you have great people, you could do anything. And when you don't have great people, you can't do anything.
No.
And it's like a non-negotiable.
Right. So then how did it happen where you became the owner and CEO of Bordner?
So in 2019, my partner, Sam Fleener, and I purchased the business. He and I are both second generation from the three original owners. They were ready to retire, and both of us, Sam and I, had both been there over 20 years. And so that's kind of how it came about. It was a natural transition. When I came aboard with Bordner, that was one of the things that was understood. I was coming aboard in order to ultimately own the business. We thought we'd have a 5, maybe 10-year plan within that. And so 19 years later, it came to fruition. But, as we've learned many times, there's a lot of things you just can't predict business-wise.
Hold on. So you said 5 to 10 years from when?
2000.
That's when you were expecting to buy the business?
Yeah. And when they were expecting to retire.
Wow. Right? So what was the holdup?
Well, I mean, by and large, it was one, the recession that hit right in 2007.
Yeah.
The second thing was just all of us kind of learning together. How do you work with, multiple people, trying to be in charge of things, and a lot of moving parts at that time. We had expanded the business quite a bit, and it was, so there were multiple factors and facets to it. But
so many people in your shoes, and to be honest, probably me, including me, would have been like, I'm going to go move on and do something else because I'm too impatient to transition or for that transition to ownership.
Yeah, I think the beautiful thing with that, though, is like every gift the Lord gives us is a curse also, right? So if you think of when it's used in our own hands, right? So if you think about, what your impatience does for your business is you guys don't leave a lot of things lingering. I mean, you're always pushing the envelope and moving things. And I'm always amazed when I walk in here, you can like feel the excellence of your place, right? Whether it's the clean things that are on the door or, just the facility as a whole, right? Like, I mean, that sense of urgency you have shows itself in your business's personality. And so for me, my strength is I have a lot of perseverance in things. And the way that shows is I can stay within situations as they develop, maybe longer than most. But again, the curse side of that is I can let things linger a lot longer than they really should. So I think we just all have to, just recognize the Lord's He's made us all very, very different.
Yes.
And, when we take everything that He's given us and we just give it back to Him and have a heart's desire for Him to work, that's when we start to see His fruit.
I think there's a lesson there of something I've really been thinking about a lot lately, and it's just the living the Christian life. And I think that includes restraint. So for me, like being impatient, I have to constantly restrain myself from acting too quickly without thinking it through, without praying about it, without reading the Bible first. And it's just this constant struggle. But I would say that's the Christian life. That's what we all, I think, should be doing according to what the Word says, because we're all imperfect. We have our gifts, but then, like you said, they become our curses if we allow them to. And it really just comes down to that restraint and self-discipline and just knowing when it's time to maybe utilize them and push them out a little bit. But then most of the time, we're probably just, keeping them under control a little bit more. Yeah,
I think that's so I've also been giving that a lot of thought, and I think that's really, if you think about what happens to you when you become a Christian, right? So, You're going along, you have a dead spiritual nature, you have your selfish nature, and you just abide by it, right? And if you want to do it, you do it, and there are really no restrictions or anything on there. And then all of a sudden, as Jesus comes into your life, he's given two titles. He's given Lord and Savior. And so when we get saved, we immediately identify with our Savior, right? I'm saved from my sin, and eternally I'm destined to spend eternity with the Lord.
Yep.
But it's that other role that Christ comes into immediately, right? As Lord, meaning now we're all stewards of everything. Right. And so, I think our selfish, sinful nature is always at war with the Holy Spirit inside us, and the answer to that is restraint, discipline, all those things that are just, apart from him, we're not going to do day to day.
Yep. So now that you are an owner, entrepreneur, what is the biggest lesson you've learned going from an employee to an owner?
That's really a funny question for me to have to answer, because after sitting in that seat of general management in the business for over 10 years, and we were getting ready to buy the business, I remember thinking, oh, this is just a formality. I'm going to sign a few, pieces of paper and, that it'll be done, but nothing's really, going to change. And that was incredibly humbling because, as I started to sign, and it was like, hey, wait a second, this says my personal residence. This says, everything gets signed right here, right? I mean, it was a very, very sobering experience within that. And so I think just learning the lesson of that level of responsibility, right? And to know that I'm not the one that's in charge of what's going to happen, yet at the same time, I'm the one accountable for it.
Yes.
There's a tremendous amount of gravity there.
A lot of trust.
Yeah.
A lot of trust is required if you want to get sleep at night.
Yes.
And that's one of the, I would agree, just over the now 17 years, I can't even believe it, January 2nd, 2006, 17 years later, that's the one lesson that I've really had to swallow was you can't control everything, even if you try. And if you try, you're just going to get in the way. You're going to slow people down. And it's only when you let go and just let them really make mistakes on their own, but then be there to kind of support them and bring them back up and say, hey, let's learn from this and move on. That, I think, is the only way to have a truly successful business.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I listened to, I can't even remember one of the books or podcasts, and somebody from Chick-fil-A, right, that was there.
Right.
But they were talking about it being, a principles-based versus a rules-based organization. And when you set up all of these rules, then everybody works, to not get in trouble, right? So they typically end up bringing their bodies and not their minds, and that just ends up, being their experience. Where principles-based says, hey, this is what we want to be conceptually. Now, figure out how to get us there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they would describe their culture. And I think, all of us experience that on, just their consistency and, the experience within that company.
What an organization that is.
Yeah.
That reminds me, Ray Dalio, he's the founder of one of the largest hedge funds out there. And he actually wrote a book about the principles that he recorded for his business. So over the years, they would fail or make mistakes, and then they would basically capture the principles that came about from those failures. And he wrote a book with all of them. I mean, there's like tons of them. So it kind of reminded me of the principles versus rules. And I'm such a believer in that, because when you create walls, and this is my personality, is if I want somebody to do something, I just create walls like a maze and say, just walk forwards and don't run into the wall. But in reality, what I should be doing the best way is helping them learn how to think for themselves on their own, so then it aligns with the company's core values. And we're all operating and thinking similar to one another in the most important ways. Now, we want diversity of thought, but we don't want it so diverse that we're now steering away from our core values and who we are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you said it, though. You and I both love EOS, right?
Right.
And we've adopted that system.
Yep.
And that system constantly takes you back to your core values.
Yes.
Right? It just says, well, does this align with the core values, right? Does this align? I mean, it's people, the way you're meeting, the way you're talking, the way you're solving things. Does it all line up with your core values? And I think just, constantly focusing in on that clarity takes a lot of just these nebulous things that we feel like we have to solve or deal with. And, just helps to think through them.
Years ago, if somebody said to me, hey, your company needs core values, I go, why do we need that? It's not necessary. I mean, just do work harder and execute and we'll be fine. The Lord had such a humbling lesson for me on that, just based on hiring so many people that just didn't fit the seat. They did not fit really our culture. And I've learned so many times, and it was based on really that we were not diligent enough to sit down and create our core values of who we are. Because that process, which we actually did through a EOS consultant, he led us through that. Instead of me trying to get up there, which is naturally what I would do, is say, all right, guys, what do you think our core values are? And just write them down and then move on 20 minutes later. This was like 4 hours, maybe even 8 hours that it took for us to come up with the core values. But I'm so thankful that we went through that process, even though during that time it was hard for me to stay engaged. But looking back, I'm so thankful for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's invaluable.
Yeah. So going back to Bordner and you becoming an owner there, what's the next step for you guys?
Well, we have a pretty aggressive growth plan within our business, and we feel like that's probably going to be geographically based as we expand out within our business. But my number one focus in the business is leadership development. So I spend 2 hours a week training 2 different teams within our company, going through a lot of this content we see up on the wall here, and with just the idea that developing people so they're ready as that opportunity presents itself, as we're led. And I think that goes back to, that was one of the things that my father-in-law taught me as we talked about him bringing me in, seeing, hey, this business needs to have some diversity within it. He was really gifted at just looking forward and anticipating things, or just seeking to kind of interpret that's happening and be proactive. And for me, I'm just real convicted that leadership development, it will always leave us with that bench that allows us to bring the next person up, in where it's needed. So that's really, as the leader, the visionary of the business, that's really where I focus a lot of my time. But as I said when I was talking about our purpose, the relationships focused, results driven, we really feel like that's just a timeless purpose for our business, that if we can focus in on the operational excellence that's required to deliver that experience for people, home improvements are going to be something that people need. Right? They need it when things are great and they're moving and everybody's getting in different houses, and they need it in times when they're not so great and they need to stay where they are and make the space work for them. So from that standpoint, we feel like the market demand is going to be there, and we can have a seat at the table if we can be great at the relationship side and the results side.
I love the leadership training, the weekly leadership training. Actually, I'm taking that idea, and we're doing that every other week here. We're going to start with that. And what I've found out is, actually, I just realized this when I was putting it together, is now I actually have to know the book well, too.
There's no better way to learn something than teach it.
Right. So when you are doing this, you're basically assigning everybody reading homework just from parts of a book that we're all reading together. Isn't that what you guys are doing?
Yeah, about 80% of the time. So 80% of the time, that's what we'll do. 10% of the time, I try to kind of look at our workload and where people are at, and if there are things that I just, maybe from a video series or something where I can bring in and just teach from.
Yep.
And then the other 10% of the time we'll use just to go over our kind of the why behind our policies, procedures, why we're doing things a certain way, or remind people, of these critical processes that we have to follow. So that's the division. But yeah, 80% of the time, right, I'm looking to have everybody absorb that content and have the rich conversation around it is what makes it memorable.
So asking your employees to read, has that been difficult, or have they all been good at it or successful at coming back the next week with completing their homework?
By and large, yeah, because
awesome.
we have that as elective. We'll invite people to do it, but we don't require it. And we also tell people, if you join and it's too much, you need to tell us, because this should be something that enhances your work, enhances your life. And if it's not doing that, don't take it on.
Sure.
So from that standpoint, so far, we've been pretty successful with that. Sure. And I think everybody, when it's reading and absorbing the content, they all do it at different levels and in different ways. And we try to allow the freedom for that,
That's great. So as a leader of your company, do you feel like you're a natural visionary?
I'm a natural learner. So I don't necessarily create things out of the ether, of the unknown, but I do pay attention to a lot of things that people are doing and seek to discern and then implement those things. So I wouldn't say that naturally, if I think of a stereotypical, like visionary person, as a leader, right? Like take Elon Musk, right? Like that guy's always thinking, 40 years down the road. And I certainly don't think like that. But I think I apply my own method of being a visionary, which is I'm just a learner. I love to learn new things, love to absorb new content. And I'm blessed with a great team that then helps me synthesize that to say, hey, this makes sense for us.
And the only reason why I ask that is because I think there's a myth out there that is really defeating a lot of people's aspirations to become leaders. And it also reminds me of this book that I think you read as well, which was The CEO Next Door. And it talks about that you don't have to be this overly extroverted, just big picture thinker to be a great CEO or a great leader in general. It just comes down to being humble and learning from your team and always being a learner and not afraid, never being afraid to get your hands dirty when the time calls. And that book was such an eye-opening moment for me because I naturally am introverted. I've been the shy kid growing up and a lot of self-doubt. I mean, confidence was never there naturally. And I used to watch and just observe people, even in high school, that just had that natural, people just gravitated towards them. And it really was defeating for me because I would think in my head, first, I could never talk like that person. I could never be that person. I could never be that, that person with tons of energy and everybody just wants to follow them. But then I realized first that God can make you anything he wants to, and that all of the disciples were nothing special. They weren't those, King Solomon's or the Davids, or even David was just a shepherd. And it was just a light bulb that went off where anybody can do God's work, even if that means doing something that you're quote unquote, naturally not good at.
Yeah, I think that's one of the great freedoms that comes from all of the people that you mentioned in the Word, right? Like if man were to make the Bible up, right, he would take all of those people that you're talking about, the people with charisma and all of these perfect stories and these highlight reels, right? And then that's what you would get. And you'd say, see, this is the perfect example. Try to achieve this.
Right.
But all the stories in the Bible are exactly the opposite. They're like, man, that guy was messed up.
Yes.
Right? Like David is called a man after God's own heart, right? All he did was have an affair and kill his best friend.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
I mean, so there's, I think that's why the Lord gives us the gift of the Word.
Yes.
Is so that we can look at these stories and recognize, like this is about what God is doing.
Yep.
Right. And he, there's no all-stars in heaven, right? There's one.
That.
There's one.
I love that saying.
And so Jesus was perfect. We're not. And yeah, he can use any of us.
Jesus is perfect. We're not. So get humble and get to work.
That's right. Well said.
So how is God using your business to further his kingdom?
Well, I like to think that he's using it first and foremost as an enhancement to our people's lives that work for us, our team members. We tell all of them if they come to work for us and they do generate a ton of business for us, right? But their home life is a wreck. Their physical just being is a wreck. We haven't won, right? So I pray that the Lord is using our business as an enhancement to their lives. But I think, we just have to humbly ask that of the Lord and trust that he will. He'll work that out perfectly. And then I think the other side of that is once we're able to achieve that, so as owners of the business, Sam, my partner and I, and as our leaders, as they are able to invest in our people return that to our customers.
Yes.
So we've taken this paradigm that if we're developing leaders, we're investing in them, we're showing them how to do things with greatness, then they're going to do that for our customers. I used to, when I first started leading, I was one of those leaders that would run around like a chicken with my head cut off, trying to do everything for everybody. And you'd add a person and all you did was just add more work for yourself because, you thought, man, if I don't do it, it's not going to get done. And you just go through all of those things. And I, we just realized over time, no, like if you invest in people and you show them how to do things really well, and you give them a passion for their work and they know their purpose, and then they go out and they take great care of our customers. And that's our goal.
Excellent. So I can't remember if you told me, are you guys bringing chaplains into the business?
Yeah, that's new to our business mid part of last year. So it's an organization called Marketplace Chaplains. Really cool organization. They come in weekly, walk around our office, walk around our yard in the back, and just make themselves available to people that may not have, another outlet to talk to about things that are bothering them. And maybe they don't, want to talk to their leaders at work, right, about those things. And so this is kind of a chance for people who don't have, a church home. Maybe they don't even have a relationship with the Lord, right? But they can find someone, they have someone they can trust. What I love about the organization is they don't report anything back to us other than just the number of interactions. Wow. Hey, we had this many interactions and that's all you get. So everything else, all of our people know is at a confidential level. But I know that if they're struggling, they at least have a resource they can go to get sound biblical wisdom for those problems rather than who knows what else may be available.
Right. I mean, the possibilities are endless now, right?
Sure.
If it's according to the world, you don't know what they're going to tell them. Yeah. Literally, especially today. So I know you're an avid reader. Other than the Bible, what has been a book that has been so impactful for your development as a leader, or even just with managing your business?
Yeah, there's so many. I'm just constantly amazed at how people are able to synthesize their thoughts, right, and really delve into something. And so I can appreciate so much of the, just the individual wisdom. So I typically remember, the most recent content, right? But one of the all-time books that I really enjoy is Simon Sinek's Start With Why.
Yep.
Make sure you know that. That gave me a lot of clarity as a leader, and that just as I need it, everybody needs that, right? For there to be purpose behind it.
Yes.
So that was really meaningful. And then there's two books that have almost the same title, but they're very, very different. One is Running Your Business by the Book.
Yes.
And it was How to Run Your Business Biblically. Specifically went into, biblical principles on here's how you do it. And then you and I just recently read David Green's new book, right?
Leadership not by the book?
Leadership not by the book, yeah. Or How to Run Your Business not by the book, or what have you.
Yep. Two books literally right there behind you.
We didn't even play on that, right? But both of those, are just really instrumental because, you're getting wisdom from guys who are seeking the Lord.
Yes.
They're seeking the Lord and how to do it. And, they're seeking the right answers within that. So the principles that you're getting are timeless.
Yeah.
So yeah, enjoy those.
I am 100% right behind you. Those two books, I just cannot forget about. I cannot forget about. And as I've just over the years of doing business and really trying to focus on profit, making money, I'm a car guy, which means constantly buying new cars and all that. It just came to a point where I wanted something more. I wanted something that is more meaningful and that was almost, if we're talking about a car, it's like you're going to drive your car around by putting corn syrup in it, or you're going to put high quality fuel that's going to help your car become a high performance machine. And for me, that was the Bible and following God's will. Because if I just constantly am trying to follow, I don't know what their religion is or what their faith is, like Elon Musk and some of these big names, or even people around our city, you see their success and you see all the things they've done, but you don't see them openly talking about their why, which for us would be to follow God's will and to further his kingdom. That has become my premium fuel that's making me wake up every morning and feeling so motivated to get God's job done for the day. And that's really been an eye-opening, just amazing experience for me, even the last couple of years, just as a business owner. So what, do you have a life hack or daily routine that you lean upon? Because I am all about productivity, and I firmly believe that God wants us to be productive. I mean, just read the parable of the talents. And what is yours? Do you have any?
Probably the one that I enact the most for me is my full focus planner by Michael Hyatt. Used that tool for 3 or 4 years now. And, I love, if you want to talk about, like God's sense of humor and his story behind that, to hear Michael Hyatt tell the story of how they came about with that planner. Because he was all about the ebooks, and we're going to be a digital business and everything is going to be digital. And their number one product is this paper planner.
Right.
So I love that. I just love the irony of those stories. But for me, and specifically, the tool within that is just the weekly recap, where you go through and you say, hey, what were my wins for the week? What did I learn? How far did you make it? You said your priorities were this. How far did you make it on them? And then, what did you learn and what will you start? What will you stop doing? From there. So that keeps me productive and focused, from an efficiency standpoint. We were talking about my stick-to-itiveness, or, seeing it through, that 20-year journey with Bordner to where we're at now. I actually have to be really careful because my routine can become an idol, right? Like I want to be in routine all the time.
Goodness, yes.
And so I have to be actually pretty conscious about trying to disrupt that every once in a while, or I'll just get a little too hooked on the autopilot.
You and I are so similar in our routines, right? And, I was thinking about this is when it's your routine, now it becomes your will as opposed to God's will. And God's will is unpredictable at times, meaning we don't know what's going to happen that day. It is predictable based on his word, but we don't know when that's going to happen. And that might happen. God's calling might happen right in the middle of your routine. And you know what? Your routine needs to go out the window and you just throw everything to the side and start running.
Yeah. Yeah. Easier said than done, but for sure.
It is. That is just words easy to say, but actually doing it. I've become so almost robotic just because I'm so obsessed with self-discipline and just trying to be more restrained and all that. But I mean, there are times you just have to stop and just listen to what you're being told and then just do it. And I would firmly believe also, or I would say that when we feel that we don't want to do something, it usually means you should be doing that so many times. And I'm trying to tally up all those instances on my day-to-day life of that I don't want to do something. And then I will compare it to, is that something I should be doing? Almost 100% of the time, it is yes. And that's just on a day-to-day basis. And I almost feel like that's that Christian life thing where you're doing the things that you don't want to do naturally that your body doesn't want to do. So greatly appreciate you coming by. This has been amazing. And I just want to say that I personally respect you so much. We've come to know each other through Acumen, through our group.
Yep.
And that's just been awesome. So I thank you for our relationship, our friendship and fellowship.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this too, man. Thanks for the time. I appreciate you as well.
Thank you.